Good evening. Welcome to the Bohemian National Hall. My name is Chris Harwood, and I am president of the New York chapter of the Czechoslovak Society of Arts and Sciences. And I'm very happy to welcome you to our program this evening on women's artistic dissent. This is an event that we've been planning and that I've been looking forward to for a while. Welcome. I just want to do a couple of introductory things. I would like to invite you to upcoming programs that we have, a series of 3 programs on 2 dates commemorating the 80-year anniversary of the end of the Second World War. And we're doing this in collaboration with the Czech Center in New York, our neighbors downstairs. So we invite you to join us for a lecture on Monday, May 5th at 7 in the evening. With our good friend Igor Lukáš from Boston University, who will be speaking about appeasement then and now, which is, I think, another one of these talks that is going to look at a historic theme that has once again become very relevant to us in the present. And then on Thursday, May 22nd, 2 separate programs, 2 separate but related programs in the evening. At 5:30, Professor Cynthia Paces from Rutgers is going to be presenting on Lidice, on the tradition of art and memory connected with this site that was razed in reaction to the assassination of Heydrich. And at 7 o'clock, Julia Urbešová from the Memory of Nations Oral History Project will be presenting oral history work that she has done on people who lived through the end of the Second World War and will be presenting memories. So please join us for that. I would like to thank, as always, the Bohemian Benevolent and Literary Association, which generously supports us and all of our programming. Also the Czech Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which for several years now has supported generously, especially our efforts to record and put up on YouTube our programming so that those who couldn't make it here will get a chance to see it later, or those of you who loved it so much can go back and view it again. And so we do encourage you to follow us on any of these media sites that you use, and especially to check out our YouTube channel, where you can find a lot of our programming from the past several years. And we'd love to hear from you if you have ideas about or just reactions to what you heard and saw. You can send us a note. And so my next step is to introduce our presenters, and I'm going to get a little help. To my right, Dr. Brenda Flanagan is Professor of Creative Writing and of Caribbean and African American Literature. She has received numerous awards, including 3 Hopwood Awards, 3 NEH Fellowships, and a Michener Fellowship. As a cultural ambassador for the United States Department of State, she has traveled extensively, particularly in Central Asia and the Middle East, often as the first American writer sent to certain regions in decades. She fell in love with the Czech Republic, which doesn't surprise me. I did too. And she's been a regular visitor there for many years. She's become an honorary member of the Prague Surrealist group and has formed strong friendships with Eva and Jan Svankmajer. Her fiction and poetry have appeared in numerous journals, and her published work includes a novel, a short story collection, and a play. Her recent activities include representing the US at international book fairs and lecturing at universities around the world. To my left, Dr. Hana Waisserova is Associate Professor of Practice of Czech and Central European Studies. And this is at the University of Nebraska. I realized the bios didn't mention you are both at University of Nebraska, am I right?
Davidson College.
Oh, Davidson College. I got mixed up. So Nebraska and Davidson College. And she's also affiliated with the Harris Center for Judaic Studies. She studied at Spelman College in Georgia and earned her PhD in Anglophone transnational literature from Palacký University in Olomouc in the Czech Republic. She also received a graduate certificate in gender studies from the University of Texas. She has published articles on South Asian and Central European women's transnational literature, on women's totalitarian experiences, on women dissidents and their activism, and also on medieval Czech literature and on Czech American culture in Nebraska. Before coming into academia, she lived in India and traveled widely in Europe, Asia, and East Africa, where she worked as an outdoor guide and a publicist. And their topic tonight is a remarkable book that they've created together, and that I've been looking forward to. And so they are going to be presenting the book. I'm going to try and help them do that. It's a book that I've been looking forward to, and I think not only I, but other people in the field. And just maybe to frame things, I want to read a passage from a book by my colleague Jonathan Bolton at Harvard, who is the author of one of the major books in English on the Czech community of dissent. It's called Worlds of Dissent. And I can't believe it, but we said it's already 13 years old. It feels like a new book to me, but it's been out there. And at that time, he wrote the following. He said, "The heroic view of dissent has tended to paint it as an individual, often a lonely activity, in fact, just like writing. This view ignores the communal structures that make such writing and protest more generally possible. Not the abstract civil society of political theory, but simple things like pubs and cafes, family and friends, and above all, a wife or husband. Indeed, many dissidents might best be thought of as spousal units. Dissident couples often worked out a clear division of labor, in which one member remained politically engaged while the other held down a job and thus avoided public protests that might have led to being fired, in order to support the family and financially, and often took care of the children as well. Usually it was the husband who took on the public role, but that was not always the case. Many writing dissidents had a partner who wrote little but played a vital role in community building. For example, Dana Němcová, the so-called spiritual mother of the musical underground, who offered her home to musicians when they had no place to stay, or of course Olga Havlová, who played a vital role in organizing the many parties, concerts, seminars, and meetings that helped intellectual dissent crystallize around her husband in the mid-1970s. Even those collections of prison letters were generally addressed to a spouse or lover, who then played a key role in collating and distributing them. There is an unmistakable gender dynamic here. The dissident theorists and thinkers who make it into Western accounts are almost all male. The closer we come to seeing dissent as a transnational dialogue about human rights or civil society, the more women seem to be erased from the picture. And this is something that Jonathan recognized, and I think all of us who have looked at the situation of dissent in Czechoslovakia or even elsewhere in East Central Europe have noticed as well, that all of the names we're reading are male names, and those of us who have dug a little deeper just know that that's only part of the story. And so I'm really happy to have these authors here who have done some of the work that Jonathan set out as needing to be done. And so I would like to ask both of you to say how you came to this project, and maybe to explain how you came together to work on this, coming from different perspectives, as was indicated in the bios. So I'm going to turn this on.
Yes, you may click. Uh-oh. Do you want to talk about that?
Oh, all right. So we will be taking turns. So thank you so much for having us, and thank you, Chris, for this generous introduction. And we just think that the book, it just connects a lot of different stories. Yeah. And one of the remarkable stories is also Brenda's stories. And so you can recognize that Brenda Flanagan is in Prague, right? You probably recognize the locations. Yeah. Near the American Embassy and also in the metro. So some years back, I went to reading by Brenda, and I was very fortunate that I could get to know her and do interview with her. And later on, we started having these conversations, which brought us together. But now again, Brenda has to explain how she sort of became invested in Czech women dissidents, especially with Eva Švankmajerová.
Well, Hana's being very modest, actually. We met at the United States Embassy in the Cultural Center in Prague. And the woman who was the Cultural Affairs officer, the local one, knew of Hana's good work as a journalist and also as a professor. And so she invited Hana. And then Hana decided that she must do a story on this crazy woman from Trinidad, who is somehow hooked up with surrealists in Prague. And she actually did a really wonderful story, and the pictures you saw are from Hana taking me all around Prague, posing in various places. I felt very much like a model. I was much thinner then. And then the article was published in Respect, which is one of the most, it's like almost a Time magazine, maybe better than Time magazine.
More like a New Yorker, I'd say.
And Hana and I became friends because she really was intrigued by, what was I doing in Prague? And because we shared this interest, this deep interest in women writers, and she had a good friend who is still a good friend, whom she wrote about in this book, and she'll tell you about her in a few minutes. And she was intrigued by my story and how I came to know Eva Švankmajerová. Do you want me to talk a little bit about that?
Sure, yeah.
Okay, so I went to Prague 10 years after the fall, of the wall, or the breakup of the wall. And wherever I go, because I'm a writer, because I'm a woman, I'm always interested in women writers. I want to know who's writing. I want to know, even if I don't know the language, I want to know something about the writers. And that summer, I'm walking all around Prague. I'm going to every bookstore I possibly can and asking people, who are the women writers? Because I was always curious as to what women were writing who lived under totalitarianism. I was curious about that. And people would say, nobody. They would mention all these male writers, Kafka. And I said, who are? And finally, in this little bookstore in Old Town, this guy said, well, I have a book, and lucky for you, it's translated into English, but is surrealist. I said, yeah, okay. And he gave it to me. It's Baradla Cave, translated by a wonderful small press in the Czech Republic, run by an American, by the way. Yes, Twisted Spoon, and I love the fact that Twisted Spoon published a surrealist text, right? And so I got it and took it back to the United States. I'd been traveling around Europe, but took it back to the United States and couldn't understand one damn word. I could understand the English, but I couldn't understand the story. And the more I read, the more I thought, I'm an intelligent person, for God's sake. I have a PhD, actually. How can I not understand this thing? And I was so intrigued by the mind of the person who had written this text. Anyway, I realized that in order to fully grasp it, I would have to know Czech history, I would have to know Czech geography, I would have to know topography, I would have to know something about surrealism. And that got me started on investigating Eva. And I'll just talk just a couple more minutes about this and then hand it over to Hana. And so I dared myself, 2 years later, in 2002, I went back to the Czech Republic to a conference put on by Czechs and Slovaks. I dared myself to go and talk about this book. But it was in Pilsen, and of course I was in Prague, and I thought, you know what? I'm going to try to find this writer. I want to let this woman know how she had blown my mind for, over a year. And of course, I knew very little Czech, just greetings. But then I happened to go into the British Council, and their office used to be in Národní třída back then. And I walked in, and there was this beautiful bouquet of flowers and this lady, and I said to her, I'm here, I'm looking for somebody. And she said, well, who are you looking for? And I told her I was looking for Eva Švankmajerová. She says, oh, I know her. She picked up the phone, called Eva immediately. Eva was so intrigued, and invited me to come to meet with her, her husband, Jan, and the rest of the surrealists who met. And as they still do, Eva died in 2005 of cancer, but the rest of them still do at Café Montmartre in Prague. And that's how Eva and I met and became fast friends. Hana? Yeah, that's our first meeting. In the dark. We were drinking pivo and eating cheese. and she, so I got to know her, and she was fascinated by the fact that I was intrigued by her work. And most of the world knew Eva as an artist, incredible artist, who did almost all the paintings, all the artwork for her very famous husband, Jan, his films, but they didn't know about Eva herself and her writing. And I was determined to find out as much as possible about her, and I promised her that I would try to write a book about her. And that's why I'm so grateful to having met Hana, because between us both, we kept our promises. You want to talk about Eda? Oh, this is in the yard, in the country, and that's Jan. When Eva died, Jan planted her ashes under this weeping willow, and every time I go to the Czech Republic, I go there and just say, we did it, girl. We did it. We did it. And this is one of those moments when I was crying, and they shouldn't have taken a picture, but so. And then, of course, we got together to write this book. Do you want to talk about this?
Yeah. So also, and maybe I would like to start that, at the time when Jonathan Bolton wrote his World of Dissent, a lot of books on women and by dissent women were not out, right? So, for example, this monography on Eva Švankmajerová is also very recent, and last year there was a beautiful exhibition in Kutná Hora, if you had a chance, and Anna Pravdová, who is the curator for Toyen exhibition, is working on another major exhibitions. But, it was just something what really brought us together, but you can see what also must have spoken to Brenda, all that humor, right? So Eva Švankmajerová became sort of well-known with her emancipation cycle, and here, at the bottom of the picture, it's in Czech, but the translation is the birth of heaviness with the respectful courtesy of Sandro Botticelli. So, that sort of humor and this sort of freshness is, I think, very, very present in her work, and that's something what, is also not being spoken about. And even so, we were both interested in very many women, and Brenda actually did a lot of interviews with various women. In the end, we settled on Eva Švankmajerová and Eda Kriseová. And it doesn't mean that the book is only about these two authors. We were just trying to sort of, paint the landscape, and we realized that even so, these two creative artists are very different. They have a lot in common, yeah? And that means that their life and creativity was just creating more space for dissent and for women next to all that sort of well-known, published, recognized dissidents, who were everywhere in a space. And these women were not, even so they did such, a remarkable work. And also, in the book, we are looking at the dynamics during the dissent era when a lot of work was actually published through samizdat. So in here we have a picture from the samizdat literary companion, and you can see Eda Kriseová, like on the second row on the very right, on the page where all these men, right? So, by the way, this literary companion, which first came in samizdat and then in 69 publishers, had more writers than the official, literary companion. However, it was not an easy world. It was sort of a male world. And then on the right side, when we went to Libri Prohibiti, Jiří Gruntorat pulled out for us huge piles of these books which, were published by Eda Kriseová in samizdat. And she also holds one of the books with her picture. So, and this is with her grandson, which is also beautiful, right? And this is one of her books with her picture. So, it was writing which sort of, saved Eda Kriseová's lives, as she told us. So, it's sort of important to remember that both Eva Švankmajerová and Eda Kriseová, they just, used creativity to keep sanity. It was their way, their imagination sort of allowed them to be free. And this was sort of, creating this very fascinating endemic space where women could create, but also, it was very interconnected with their life. So in here, we have Eda Kriseová, who was a very well-known journalist in the 1960s, and she was, award-winning journalist in Mladý svět and then in Listy, and then she was banned right away, after, and then what to do now? So then we also have Rosemary here, who met Eda in the hard times. So, it was just something what was like, what to do? And then she just reinvented herself by volunteering in mental institution, where she started writing, and I will later on read one short story about one of those patients. And then, she somehow survived those hard years, and writing helped her to keep her sanity. And then suddenly 1989 came, right? And she joined Havel. She was among the 10 first people who went to the castle and, helped to build sort of government, and she was in charge of the office of the pardons, and she just did so much work, for about 2.5 years. And then when the Czechoslovakia divorced Slovakia, then she became again a freelance writer. So this is a lot of turmoil in one's life, which is also reflected in her writing. And this is just, recently Eda's husband Josef died, and Magdalena Placová shared this photograph with us, that this was a photo which her father always, had in his room, with her 2 daughters, and one is, very good gynecological surgeon, and the other one is very well-known writer. So anyway, one of the topics on which we focused in our book was that really these lives and writing cannot be separated, which tend to be the case with quite a few well-known Czech female writers, including, for example, Božena Němcová. We either read her or talk about her life, right? But we feel that this is something what needs to be connected. So this was one of our themes, that this can be interconnected. And as you see, Eda Kriseová published all these different books. And then, I will probably move onto this a little bit later when I read.
Okay. Well, I think I'll probably read just a little bit from the book, if that's okay with you all. It's rather expensive, so I can't read very much. If you will hold this for I can only read a little bit at a time. So, since Hannah mentioned the way in which writing saved these women, and so this is a little bit about Eva, and the first part of the book is the second part of the book is about her. It's called Writing as Catharsis. In the mid-1970s, Eva and her husband had become very, very involved with the Czech Surrealists group. In addition to the surreptitious meetings in their flats, because of course they could not meet openly, the group would make occasional visits to a favorite pub. And as they, hey, Carlos. Oh, I thought that was Carlos. I so wanted to see my friend Carlos. Anyway, part of what was happening with this group is that, they came from the various parts of Czechoslovakia. Remember, back then it was one country. Now it's two different countries, right? And they would meet at this really interesting cafe. And they were all very interested, as a lot of Czechs are, I find, with eroticism. And at this point in the mid-1970s, the Czech Surrealist group decided to put together some books about eroticism. And they were anthologies. And one of them told me all these anthologies were put together in a single copy with typescript text and photographic reproductions of visual art. And within the framework of the collective activity, they mainly had a character of a work in progress. Many of these anthologies included drawings by Eva Švankmajerová, which were either spontaneous interpretations of a written work by another member of the group or her own visual representation of a topic the group was engaged in interrogating. One of the things that I was always intrigued by with Eva is that when she wrote, she never rewrote anything. The first time it came, we writers were always rewriting and rewriting. What came out of her was what you would read on the page if you were part of that group. And another interesting aspect about her work is that the title always came last. I teach creative writing, and I'm always telling my students, do a title, even the tentative title, and it'll help you as a guidepost. Well, with Eva, the title always came last. The Surrealists, of course, were being monitored constantly by men in leather jackets. Why did they like those leather jackets? I never could figure that out. So Eva, Jan, and the Surrealists were able to remain unnoticed for a while. But as she explained to me once, they had to stop meeting after one particular incident where one night they noticed that at the pub the group favored, quote, there was a man in a leather jacket, secret police, watching them. So it became very risky. But still, Eva did not give up writing. Listening, this is, by the way, this part of the book comes out of several interviews I did with her. So listening to Eva Švankmajerová speak of those days under Stalinism, it is clear from her shaking voice and her eyes that blaze behind the clear lens of her rounded glasses that the memory of those days, those long nights, still disturbs. As the mother of two young children, she had to be extra cautious. Her relationship with her mother which was always one of tremendous dissonance, Eva hated her mother. Absolutely hated her mother. She also hated being a mother. And in the 1970s, her relationship with her mother had not improved. I'll tell you why she hated her mother. Her grandmother had a son, Eva's uncle, who died in the war with the Germans. And Eva's mother gave Eva to her grandmother, almost as a substitute child, thus separating Eva from her father, whom she adored, her mother, whom she loved then, but then grew to hate, and her brothers. And Eva never forgave her mother for that, and grew up, really, even though she loved her grandmother and her grandfather, she grew up in a very, very dysfunctional relationship with her mother. Anyway, besides her children, Eva feared that if the secret police caught on to what she and other surrealists were doing, they would put her in jail. And so she feared that incarceration would destroy her own creativity. And here's a poem she wrote in 1976, which expresses some of that ambulance that would have been curtailed. The poem is called Stunned by Freedom. You will learn that the line will captivate you like a flight to fire. Color will deprive you of a mind similar to blood and despair. Clay will lock you up in prison. You will go to the cemetery, and there you will be similar to semen. Erases. When you are finally saved, even with your thoughts. Eva explains that there were people at that time who were willing to risk getting arrested by openly defying the regime. And although she was grateful for those who were courageous enough to continue working openly, even if it meant they were going to jail, she repeats that she had to give serious consideration to who would take care of her infant son and daughter. Folded into those considerations was, I believe, her fear of the possibility of her children suffering a fate similar to her own if she were to be caught being openly defiant. But it was poetry. It was poetry and it was painting. And it was having a group of friends who admired and respected her that saved Eva Švankmajerová during all those years under totalitarianism. Oh, there's Carlos. I just shouted out for you. So Carlos has arrived, people.
In the house.
All right. Welcome, Carlos. In the book, we open up like different themes which women write about well, and which sort of we have found like sort of distorted, for example, when written about by different male authors, but also by female authors who somehow, have a hard time to, write about womanhood in some sort of undistorted way, right? Sometimes there are lots of instances. So. It was very, very refreshing. For example, when also Eda Kriseová was writing about bodies, and there's also lots of poetry, but lots of humor. So just to start on a less, sort of humorous but pretty powerful note. So she, in one of her books, which is also like philosophical essay / memoir / short stories, she write about abandoned bodies, yeah. Our bodies, and now I quote, our bodies are so messed up because we are hardly ever with them. In our thoughts, we dwell either in the past or in the future. We remember, evoke our emotions of the time and compare them with the present. We carry behind us the burden of feelings and injuries that settled in us in childhood. The jellyfish of the past stretches out its tentacles wherever it can, stings, and releases venom into the wound. This is just, like a little snippet of this sort of a space which she opens up by her writing, but she's also, using a lot of humor, yeah. So one of my very favorite stories is a short story called How Many Resurrections? And in this story, Eva Kriseová explores like women's empathy, perspectives, options, women's choices, and she's also perhaps playing around Michel Foucault ideas in the history of sexuality on repressive powers over like human bodies, right? So, in this short story, Eda Kriseová was heavily invested in observing dignity among patients in the mental asylum. And she wrote a fascinating short story about female sexuality in which free, unrestricted sexuality mirrors liberation and freedom. As Foucault suggests, many regimes have appropriated rights to free sexuality. If the grasp of the normalizing power over sexuality and the body is compromised, it can have fatal consequences. So in this short story, institutional care is a metaphor for the normalization regime's control of all aspects of one's life. So actually, just a footnote, Eda Kriseová, when she was volunteering in the mental asylum, because she was a journalist, she wasn't a medical person, so she was just a volunteer. But she realized that among patients who have a lot of imaginations, that is actually a lot of freedom in the air, paradoxically more than like behind the bars. So she was writing texts set in mental asylum for quite a few years, and she said she was really grateful to these patients that they help her to fabulate, because before she was journalist, she was writing facts, and suddenly this imaginative person helped her. So, in How Many Resurrections, Eda Kriseová features an old, short, fat, and forgotten Mrs. Koupková, who used to be a nymphomaniac, but now she is doped, immobile, and pitiful. She is in a hospital room that serves as a last resort. She is among those awaiting their death. She has no future, no family, and no hope. A social worker remembers her as the old whore who would run and make out with any man she could find, and how she hated to chase after her, as she had to seek her and bring her back. Now she is expected to die soon. Suddenly, however, the old woman miraculously improves as she stashes her drugs away instead of taking them. She starts making indecent proposals again, and is caught performing in flagranti acts. Again, she's caught, doped, and locked up. Then, unexpectedly, this mental institution patient repeats her trick and she flees. She keeps walking in slippers for a few days and sleeps in haystacks to save the little money she has. She's over 70 now. She reaches a town, gets a room in a cheap hotel, and starts offering herself. Quote, she charged only 10 crowns as she was a decent woman. However, the institution hears about where she was, and the staff comes to get her again. They lock her up in the secure psychiatric ward again and dope her with pills. She becomes apathetic. Soon her health deteriorates and she dies. The social worker, who lives a rather monotonous and unhappy life, feels exhausted and suddenly imagines Mrs. Koupková, quote, twiddling her thumbs, her fat eyes blinking lasciviously, as if she is saying, all of you are long dead, only me, I was alive.
Lovely. Thank you so much for these readings that I think give us a nice view into some of the interests and techniques of the artists you've looked at. I know there is a lot there, a lot we could go into. I'm going to sort of pose a question or two to sort of maybe bring out some points of comparison. When I read about the dissidents and the way they lived, one of the topics that you come across is the topic of marital infidelity. You can't get very far in looking at the life of Václav Havel or Ivan Klima or any of these other leading figures in Czech dissent without, or of course Václav, without coming against the theme of marital infidelity. And it seems like there's a lot of different variations on it, including marriages that both partners had accepted as being open relationships. And yet, when I read these stories, I can't help feeling that they almost always developed in ways that were to the man's advantage more than to the woman's. And I wonder if this was a topic that you encountered, focusing on these two figures, or in the work you devoted, just maybe to point out that although the book has these two central chapters on the characters that we've met, Eva Švankmajerová and Eda Kriseová, you do have both an introductory chapter and a third chapter that provide a good amount of material on other prominent women who were creative figures in Dissent. So if you have any thoughts that occur to you from your investigations on that phenomenon.
All right.
Well, I don't want to give away secrets because you need to buy the book and read. See, you say infidelity, and the way I think in which we sometimes think of that word in the United States, it has a great many negative connotations. I think when people like Eva and Jan, and I cannot speak for Eda, but like Eva and Jan, live under the kind of repressions that they were living under, friendships among the group become very important. And maybe sometimes that friendship may have something to do with sex, But I don't think that Eva and Jan, although she did try to leave him once, you'll have to buy the book to find that out. She wanted to. I don't think that they looked upon that in the way in which we did. I mean, people, when you live under the repressive regimes that they lived under, you try to snatch your freedom wherever you can. And sometimes that freedom came with a relationship with somebody else, a short relationship with somebody else. So, this is not something that I would ever have looked askance at Jan or even Eva if she had been involved. What about Eda?
Just to add that, of course, sexual liberation is very much part of the agenda of surrealists, right?
Well, I'm a surrealist. Is sexual liberation part of my agenda? Yes.
Yeah. What about from your perspective?
So, in the book, I actually sort of look at one interesting scenario, or we look. So, today, obviously, we don't want to judge friendship with benefits, but, it was also something what the regime used heavily against the dissidents, and they knew it. So, for example, in here, I write about a case of Zdenka Erteltlová, which was actually sort of, described by Jonathan Bolton in his book, but he didn't go beyond sort of just having sympathy with, because, Vaculík, it was all about Vaculík, right? The regime wanted to get back to him and scandalize him, so obviously they wanted to create a shock. So Zdenka Erteltlová, who was a very important typist of Edice Petlice, Padlock edition, was his mistress. She even apparently got divorced because of him, etc., etc. And so they, without warning, published some of the nude pictures. Yeah, it was a manipulation of a private life. And then, obviously, everybody was very sorry for the wife, Madla Vaculíková, who had to put up with all this. But also, Vaculík himself and others have been describing a lot of intimate details and even, turning female bodies upside down, not in very favorable ways. So this is those distorted images we talk about. But, when I had a conversation about this with Eda Kriseová, she is somebody who can set things right because, every coin has two sides. And, these were difficult choices people were making, and she would understand the position of a wife, but she would also was saying that the typist, about whom this was, just paid such a high price because she was harassed by the regime. She was, put in mental institution, and then the regime sort of, pressed like a poor wife, and she's just the evil mistress thing, right? Even so, she was a, extraordinary person, brave person who has done a lot of fantastic work. So, we really don't want to judge this. However, a lot of women were also sort of sacrificing their privacy for their men at every cost. But we also wanted to write about women who were their own women. Not everything is about men, right? So we know that with Havel, there was an earthquake when Jitka Vodňanská published, like a couple years back, 3 years back, 4 years back, her memoir, of her, dating with Havel and all the letters, but and others were saying, why? Okay, it's published, but things were so much more complex, and it was about solidarity. But what we are looking at, not at scandals and judgments, but about how women's solidarity work, how women could support each other, even so they played sort of second fiddle, how they would sort of have their escapes to nature, to various ways of supporting, and they were also very good at operating in shadows. And there are lots of really important voices across women dissent, like Jiřina Šiklová, Eva Kanturková, who actually explain what these creative, dissident female writers, how they understood the dissent, but they were also able to be their own women without having some sort of, labels or some sort of moral judgment. So absolutely, it's a huge topic, but it is just something what has to be really handled with care.
I don't want to be accused of bringing in sensationalist topics. It's something that, again, when I read the literature and when I read the biographical information, it does sort of catch your attention.
It's what the men focus on.
Thank you. I guess my other question before that, the book does have this kind of striking character of having two central protagonists who I know you use to sort of bring out, features that are not just specific to them. But I wonder if there were other people, other characters that either of you had a strong interest in, were tempted to make the subject of a separate chapter, who you wish someone else maybe would write a long chapter or a whole book on, someone that we should be more aware of about the role they played and the creative work they did?
Well, there are not many young Czech female surrealists, but there is one who helped me do a lot of translating and went with me several times to Eva's. By the way, she'd never been to Eva's house until Eva invited me, which is another interesting thing. As some of you who are Czech may know, Czechs do not invite you to their homes. You have to be really close to them because they grew up, people like Eva and Eda grew up at a time when you could trust very few people. And if someone from that country invited you to their home, then that meant that you were a trustworthy person. And so Katrina was amazed when Eva invited me to her house. She'd known Eva for like 12 years, and it was the first time Eva had ever invited her to her house. And she's a young surrealist painter and poet, and there is a portion of the book, the last part of of our book, that is devoted to her. She's sort of different from Eva, and Eva, by the way, some of you might know, was known as the mother of Czech Surrealism. She's so respected, so brilliant, so innovative, so different from anybody. And Katrina, in her own way, is different as well. And I'm hoping to do a full book on her in a year or so.
Okay, so there are many, yeah, and also in the book, we have like a chapter 4 when we just sort of try to touch on this. So, for example, within the last decade, there was a lot of testimonial literature published, which sort of shed light. But lots of these women writers enter in conversation with the lives of their spouses. Right. For example, Dana Horáková and Pavel Juráček, yeah, very famous sort of literary conversation happening through their memoirs. Olga Stankovičová, yeah. All we have like accounts of what people went through, like Ivanka Lefer, and lots of these women actually went into exile, which empowered them into writing these memoirs. But there are many, many more. But maybe one case which is very interesting is Zdena Tominová, who was sort of mostly known for being brutalized, physically brutalized by the police. She was really, attacked. She lost consciousness. She had really bad concussion, pretty serious. And then they left for England. And even though she was known as the translator, she was also surrealist poet. Her poetry came out. She was a playwright. Her play Totální nasazení, how would we translate it? Total deployment, yeah, describes her life, in Dissent. But she published 2 novels in England when she was already in exile, and these novels are pretty good, and they won awards. But because she was focused on her activist work, these novels were not really published in Czech, I think, or maybe recently, but they're not known about. Recently, we had also collected works of Nadia Plíšková, who writes in this sort of very raw voice, which is also in a certain way conversation with Karel Nepraš, but also in her time, it was something what, like, for example, Chalupecký was like, you know what, I'm not sure what to do about this. This is too personal, right? So there are lots of, instances of women art just creating space, being sort of published, not to be, just labeled that this is some women's literature, why should we read it? It is finally the space is sort of opening up, but I think we need to bring in more examples and more discussion and appreciation of these authors, and then suddenly we will see there is a whole mushroom of works, appearing. Věra Jourová, for example, again, very interesting poet, even so she is no more known as an art critic, and I'm sure when you start thinking, you will probably get quite a few more. Yeah, and also women are curators. They have done lots of, fantastic work. And there's just so many hats women have been wearing that it's, that it was always like a part of the creative process, but not only writing, but connected to so very many ways.
Maybe one other question that you could each respond to. Is there a work by your subject that is accessible in English that you would recommend to our audience to come to appreciate what they do?
Well, so you should certainly read Bradley Cave, and there's a most recently issued edition that I understand corrects a lot that had been misunderstood in the earlier editions. So Twisted Spoon Press has published it. I think it came out in 2023, and that's in English. And to read that, you'd be fascinated. You will not only be fascinated by the text, you'll be fascinated by the mind of the woman who did this. And a lot of her poems are available in English. Analogon is a Czech Surrealist magazine, and very often they would do a section in the back that is translated into English. And so some of her poems. But I think one of the things that Eva appreciated was that I wanted to bring attention to her work to an English-speaking audience. And for that, I'm grateful for her for allowing me to be able to do that. And I recommend her work. Since the book came out, there have been more and more exhibitions that are actually focused mainly on Eva's work rather than on Jan's, because before this it was only about Jan. One of my colleagues at Davidson College heard that I was doing work in the Czech Republic. She said, "Oh, do you know Jan Svankmajer is the Steven Spielberg of Central Europe?" I actually quoted him. I didn't give his name because I don't like him, but I actually quoted him as one of my colleagues in the book. And tremendous respect. So Jan had all of the attention being focused on him. And now finally, Eva is getting her due.
So with Eda Kriseová, she came out in Dutch, German, and in English mostly in different anthologies or Partisans reviews. So definitely it would be great, to have her like a, novel published. And last year there was a sort of huge interest and couple republication of her novel Cats' Lives, Kočičí životy, which is about Czechs who are set in Rutynia. So there is the topic of Ukraine and relocation. And here, I just wanted to say that, and point attention to this, that the way of life and creativity stays with these women, and they have these fantastic creative networks. So I just want to give you a heads up, and when you go to Prague, get in touch with them, because when the war started, they were quick, right? They created a space called Cafe Žinka, which means Cafe Woman, for Ukrainian women. First, it was in Vinohrady, in one of the coffee houses run by one a friend, also, another Juanita Cancel, another sort of, immigrant. But later on, when they lost the cafe, they relocated, and they are still in Vinohrady in Koruni. And they meet every Thursday, and it became a very sustainable group. And if you go to Prague, there on Thursdays, go and meet with them, support them, because they get lots of food. These Ukrainian women cook together. They also have women who are from the previous Russian invasions. They are there. They cook together, sing together in different languages, then exercise, make craft. Make candles or stuff for the front line. They organize collections. They keep sending stuff to the front line, whatever people need, like small things, big things. They think about everybody. Or they had a couple cars. And they keep going. Yeah, and the group is called Grandmas Without Borders. But on top of it, they also do a lot of advocacy. They speak in radio, they speak to the politicians, they ask, don't send tanks, send field hospital, help. Now they are already writing quite a few petitions because of the current politics, right? And they also turned an apartment of Jiřina Šiklova into Jiřineum, a space where people like you can go and stay, support good cause, and they organize their different debates. So, they do a lot because they are not afraid, and they are used to operate from this sort of uninstitutional position. They are used to speaking in their voice, they support each other, and they are very creative. So when we had the book thing in Prague, the Grandmas Without Borders / dissidents, who have a group called Těsto, which means Tao, and who sing Czech songs, forgotten songs, sort of from the 19th century. They sing for us. Right? So it was just beautiful, but they do so much work, and their sort of credo is like, everybody who can help, and we do, whatever we do for others, we do it for ourselves. So they're a really impactful group which replicated this sort of creativity and solidarity from the past into this current mode. So I encourage you, when you go to Prague, find out what they are up to. There's also Facebook for Cafe Žinka, and go and support them, join them, they will just appreciate the solidarity.
Thank you so much. Maybe we could open up for questions from the audience or comments on anything you've heard. Don't be shy. I mean, they said you have to buy the book, but I bet if you had a specific question, they're not going to deny you.
You said that when you ran into the first book, you found a surrealist writing that you couldn't understand at all. What did you understand after a year of studying it? What did you find out in there?
The last part of?
you mentioned that you couldn't understand the book, right?
Yes.
And you couldn't understand the ideas, and
Yeah.
you couldn't understand maybe the style.
Right.
So after having studied it, what is it that you have learned from it?
Oh, I have learned so much. Because as I said, I actually had to learn about Czech history. I had to learn Czech geography, Czech topography. I had to learn about the caves, those caves actually. But I had to learn more than anything the way in which Eva's mind works. That book helped me understand how her mind works. And I tell you, her mind it didn't work like anybody else's mind, right? It's topsy-turvy, it's inside out, it's round about in the way in which she thought. And so I have to go back quite often to read the book. In fact, when you buy the book, our book, you will find that there is a section in here that is actually about Baradla Cave. And the ways in which Baradla Cave made me understand Eva, because Eva becomes one of the characters. Jan is also one of the characters. There are lots of people all around her that are characters. So it made me understand something about her family, and it made me understand something about her style. I don't think I could have understood her poetry, even in translation, if I had not understood what she was trying to do in Baradla Cave. And what Baradla Cave is about, it's about repression, it's about totalitarianism, it's about the ways in which the characters seek to live and survive and have a sense of humor in spite of that. So I also understood a great deal about Czech history. Thanks for that question.
Okay, so I would like to go back to that mention which Chris made in the beginning about like coupleism. I think that's a very interesting idea that it was very typical for Dissent. So since you studied more of these women, what was like, did you see different patterns and what was more common? That the woman was more like in there but a little bit oppressed in the shadow, as in the case of Eva? Or that the woman was the empowered one and the husband was more in the shadow? Or were there also sort of equal balanced couples? So if you could speak a little bit more to that, what did you see? Because I think it's a very interesting idea, like that typically it was never the case that one of them would be ignorant completely, right?
Okay, so for example, I don't know, you heard about Svetlana Alexievich, who got Nobel Prize, right? She got a Nobel Prize for doing oral histories when she was working with the women who in the Soviet Union with all that sort of, survived. But she said the hardest was to get these women talking to say what they want in their voice. So what we are interested in with Brenda, not really judging, who is what and how these, relationship communities work, but we wanted to read, women's voice, which was free and creative. And that's what we were looking for, And also because, obviously Brenda is, international writer, artist, somebody who has been exposed to a lot of stuff. And I also had, the lack being outside. And we just felt that suddenly we felt so much freedom through creativity represented by these women. And that's what we were swept by. That's what we became really, really interested in. And that's what we were trying to capture.
In fact, I would go so far as to say that Eva and I were very much alike. Not about fooling around with men, but very much alike in that I had 7 brothers, and I always wanted to do what they were doing. And my mother had 14 children, 7 boys, 7 girls, very balanced life. But I never wanted to do what the girls were doing. Eva was the same thing. Her family was not that large, but she passionately hated being female. She wasn't gay or anything like that. She just hated the restrictions that were placed upon her as a female. And the more I got to know her, the more I realized, oh my God, this is my sister, because I was always getting in trouble when I was growing up for doing the things that my brothers were allowed to do. And so I think Eva recognized that in me as well, that we wanted to grow up in a world where we were free, just as men, to do whatever we wanted to do. And just as writing saved Eva, writing is what saved me. Writing is what saved me.
Isn't it interesting that the first Czech surrealist, Toyen, had to basically look like a man to
Oh
be
yes,
able to
we
be
should
part
have
of
mentioned
that.
Tyann,
Yeah.
because there's a book coming out about her again this year, and yes, another one, and she's mentioned in here as well. Yes.
And also, sorry, but you never mentioned Eda's husband. What was the relationship there?
Okay. So I think that they, yeah. So he was a filmmaker. Yeah, they supported each other very much, and because we became really very close with her and with Josef. I could understand it, but also Eda, in some of her philosophical, she's very frank. It was not easy, and those were the days. But again, it is something what they were sort of open about, but they don't wallow in it. They had their own work. She was writing, he was doing her, film work, the one which he was allowed to do, and later on, only after 1989, he could do more of the documentary film work. But I think that they were very supportive of each other, despite whatever they have been through.
Jan was so supportive and so loved Eva that when Eva died, Jan actually was institutionalized for quite a long time. Now he's in a very healthy relationship with Irina, but Pia adored his wife. They were like this for so many years, and there's a whole section in the book about Eva actually going after Jan. She went after him. Yes.
I was struck by the comment of Eda when she said, I wasn't a dissident writer, but then I got censored and then I became one. And I'm wondering how much of an effect that situation, if it dramatically changed the way these women express themselves as writers, or if it was just like an increasing, maybe more intense way that they had already expressed themselves, or was there kind of a before-after moment of realization?
Yeah, absolutely. Because also in the first chapter, we are looking at various women and how they realized that they were the dissent, how they felt about it. And some women, for example, they also, describe still this sort of asymmetry. For example, Maria Ruth Křižková, she was, because there was always, when they were, in Charta 77 Charter, there always have to be 3 spokesmen, yeah? And one of them was to be woman. And she, in one of her memoirs, she mentions, well, these men, they spoke so beautifully, but then we had to wash the dishes, right? So I think women had to be just sort of cunning, and they gradually crafted their own spaces and started supporting each other. But a lot of women were pressed into doing it, in the name of a good cause for their husband or for the group or for the commune. And sometimes they were so busy. Also, they were so busy, like in a book called Bytová revolta, Apartment Revolt, Marcela Linková interviewed very many women about their dissent. They were so busy that they just didn't have time. So women had to be really extraordinary and just to create space for themselves, to create. And when we talked to Jan Svankmajer, he mentioned how Eva was just passionately creating. And when she had her kid around, she didn't want to send them to school because it was institutional care. She wanted them to be around with her and just be painting and sort of creating this space. So I think it had to be, gradual. It was strategic. There were also a lot of different understanding of what dissent is. For some people, it was the parallel polis, it's us and them. For others, like, for example, for Petr Pidhart, he wanted more like an open community. He said, if we are to change the society, we have to, meet with others. We have to be part of it, yeah? For some people, it was the underground, the second culture. So there were lots of different understanding of what it is, and gradually, this gained some sort of meanings, but because women were the busy bodies within the dissent, I think for them, it was not so much about theoretizing what they are and if they are dissident or not, but it was about let's keep things moving, let's work for the community, let's support each other, because, things were just not easy and they were so busy, doing all sorts of things, supporting families, but at the same time keeping their sanity through creativity, through writing or through friendships or being in the woods, collecting herbs, you name it, right?
Yeah, and over the years I interviewed many, many other women just to get a sense of how their lives, Eva's life is special in a certain way because she was surrealist and she had a group of men around her mainly who were very supportive and who understood her. But I interviewed many other women about their lives and found out so many interesting things, that these women weren't writers, they were just ordinary women out there working, and what it was like to live under totalitarianism, just everyday life. One of the things I was stunned to find out from one of them, and I still can't wrap my mind around it, that one of them told me that one of her friends needed an abortion, but had to go through a committee in order to get that abortion approved. And sometimes when I think of life in the United States these days, I'm thinking, wow, I think we're nearing totalitarianism, aren't we? But maybe I shouldn't go there, should I? Maybe I shouldn't go there.
Any other questions? Yeah, I see one here.
Hi. As I said, I met Eda years ago in 1984, and all this time, I have read several stories that she wrote that were translated, but there aren't a lot. And you said that a novel of hers was maybe going to be published, and I just wondered, how hard is it these days to get work translated into English? Because it's funny to know someone so many years, and I'm a writer myself, that I'm like, I want to read it. I don't read German, and so anyway.
Yeah, that's a big question, especially now. So, we had a conversation about this with, different Czech translation, like Alex, right? Who tell us, it depends. It's just somebody has to decide. Maybe the Twisted Spoon Press is a good sort of, alley to work with, but absolutely, it's problematic, and then there are different, usually anthologies or journals which have published. So quite a few of different short stories were part of either anthologies or journals in English, but otherwise her like full books were more available in Dutch and German. Yeah.
I could just add that, the situation for book publishing in general is more challenging, and that means that the challenges faced by small sections in the market, like translated literature, are worse. At the same time, the industry has reacted, and there are not a ton of books getting translated, and they're certainly not leaping up the bestseller charts, but there are actually a lot of entities out there, small entities that are still devoted to the translation market. And I'm not, I think it's not too disappointing that the number of new Czech titles that are getting translated now as opposed to 30 years ago. So.
And to add to that, Hana and I took 3 weeks. We sent in our proposal, and within 3 weeks we had an acceptance, and that is tremendously unusual for a very high-profile press like Rowan, very, very unusual. So it does show that there is interest out there in this kind of work, yeah. And if you all don't ask more questions, I'll start singing, then it'll start raining.
Just a point of reference. During Soviet Union, the most dangerous weapon was a mimeograph.
Yes.
And because that's how the underground got
Yes.
published. And so being from the Czech Republic now, you're able to have that freedom.
Yeah.
How do you think the older writers are looking at that now?
Well, I have several mimeograph pages from women I interviewed, and that was one of the most wonderful stories. And they still have these, and they shared them with me. Because growing up in Trinidad, we were mimeographing stuff, but not because we lived under colonialism, which was a kind of totalitarianism, but not quite, right? And we weren't mimeographing stuff for the same reasons. But the stories they told about how they would get together and copy these things and then, share them with each other. It's just, those stories are fascinating, and those stories, I think, many of them still need to be told. I think one of the things that happened back then was there was a kind of community that we probably don't have today, not in the same way, but people got together surreptitiously. They knew what they were doing would be considered illegal. They knew what they would be doing might land them in jail, but they still dared to copy books. And they were always fascinated by American writers. And one of them told me about how there would be books available on Thursdays sometimes. But what you also need to know is that this young woman spent part of her life under totalitarianism and could probably tell you a lot about that. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I can just tell about the book. So
Yes.
yeah. So imagine that you have this book and you can, it's typed and you can feel that, there are only very few copies and there are 30 other people waiting. So you have to read and pass it on. So there was this sort of urgency and physical experience in reading these type of books. And then after the revolution, my brother started working for Inverse publishing house, which was, and we were carrying these books everywhere. There was so much hunger for all sorts of books. So obviously lots of writers had to deal with this dynamics that first they couldn't officially, then there was so much hunger, then there was the commercial period. So this is fascinating.
2 questions. Who is the dissident in you? Each one? And
I think we both are in many ways. I'm far older than Hannah, and so I've had much more experience being a dissident than. But I'm considered a troublemaker wherever I am because I ask questions. I tangle with authority. I get into trouble, but I will keep doing it until the day I die. Hannah?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a badge of honor. And we for me, it's just like, look up to people like Brenda, to people who do civic activism, or now to the Grandmas Without Borders. And it's just fascinating. And it's so, inspirational. That it's about being there for others and not to be sort of, pushed back and help those who need to be helped. Yeah, I think that's what I like very much.
But we don't put
also
labels on
it's
ourselves.
the camaraderie also.
Yeah.
But and what was surprising to you when you were actually doing the book?
What was surprising?
What surprised you?
Oh, Lord, there were so many things that surprised me. One of the things that, it's not so much a surprise, but I was in awe of Eva's creativity because if you go to their homes, they have 2 homes, one right under the castle and one in the country, you would see her incredible artistic range. She's also a sculptor, and she's put so much energy into that I have to tell you that sometimes I'm rather old. I'm 78 years old, and sometimes it's hard for me to get up in the morning and go to work. I'm still teaching full time, but I get up because I think of Eva and I think of her energy and all the work that she's done and all the work that she's left us. She's incredibly creative. Jan, they actually have a whole museum of her paintings and her sculptures and all of that in the country. Yeah.
So, so for me, it's just I was taking many rabbit holes when reading Eda Kriseová, and I just feel also the older she gets, her writing is more and more rich. So allow me just maybe one of her quotes, which I think speaks for this sort of a growing richness and connectivity and planetary connection. So I think life is something so precious that you are not allowed to let it be limited to follow any limitations. I mean voluntarily. Of course you can be put in prison or worse things could happen, but still you may feel free. And I think to live a life and not to be satisfied with it is a great sin.